All right, welcome everyone to the ATI teleconference, the first in a series of members-only teleconferences. This one is on conversations in travel training. I have a couple of ground rules to go over before we get started, just so that everybody knows what to expect during the session. If you are not in a quiet location, we are going to ask that you move to a quiet location so that you can participate in the conversation when it's time to do that. If you're unable to move to a quiet location, you will have the option to post any questions or comments that you have either in the chat box or the question box. So you do have an option there if you're not able to take your phone off mute because of background noise. If you're not talking, we do ask that you go ahead and keep your phone or the webinar room on mute, especially if you do have any background noise at your location. This is going to make the conversation a little bit easier. As we discuss the questions today and all of the different topics that we have, we are going to ask that you refrain from providing any identifying information regarding any trainee that you're talking about or individual involved in the program or other stakeholder, depending on the circumstance or situation that you're talking about during the discussion, because we are recording the session today and we want to make sure that no identifying information is provided, because we're going to provide the recording to all of the ATI members and it will be available on the website. Finally, before I introduce our moderators, just a quick disclaimer that there's going to be a lot of opinions and views and everything discussed today, and we want to make sure that you understand that they don't necessarily reflect the official position of ATI. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderators. We are super lucky today to have both Mike Mullins from Ride Connection and Steve Garcia from the New York Department of Ed with us. They're going to be talking about the questions, providing answers, and keeping the conversation going. So if you guys wouldn't mind doing a quick introduction and then turn it back over to me and I'll give the instructions for questions.
All right, so I guess since I'm first on the screen, I'll let you know who I am. I'm Mike Mullins, Mobility Director here at Ride Connection. I started my career in transportation in August of 1997, so I've been around the block just a couple of times. I've spent the last 15 years here at Ride Connection developing, managing, supervising our travel training program. We've come a long way in a short amount of time. The first fiscal year that we provided travel instruction was in 2004. We started late in the year. I think we trained about 22 people that portion of the year, and we were pretty proud of that. Fast forward to today, we're training somewhere in the order of 325, 330 people every year.
Hi, everybody. Steve Garcia here. Oh, you finished, Mike?
I'm done. I'm good.
All right, Steve Garcia here. As you can see, New York City Department of Education. I've been an employee with the city for over 40 years, 35 of which have been with travel training. The City Travel Training Program will be celebrating its 50th year, not this school year, the following school year, 2020-21. The program has trained many thousands of students. We continue to do so. We've got a citywide program that functions year-round. We have about we're getting close to 40 staff citywide. And we've been doing it a while, so we do things differently. It's a public school system, so I think today will be interesting hearing from the school system's point of view and from Mike's Ride Connection. All right, Christy, it's all yours.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I'm super excited to hear from both of the moderators today, and I think that you guys are going to really appreciate what they bring to the table. So without keeping us from our discussion any longer, let me just tell you guys how you can ask your questions. We did get a few questions in advance, and we're going to kick off the session by addressing the first one of those. But as the moderators talk about that, and as there's some conversation going on about that particular question, you can go ahead and start thinking of your additional questions that you want to present, and you can present those to us in one of three ways. You can either enter it into the chat box, but just an FYI, if you do that, everybody on the webinar is going to be able to see it. It's going to be public to all the participants. You can also enter it into the Q&A box. That box can only be seen by panelists or moderators. And so if you have something that you want to, present a little bit more anonymously, you can do it that way. Or you can submit your question by speaking it. You can talk over the phone or the webinar room. If you want to present a new question, we'll just ask that you raise your hand to do that, and then we'll call on you. Anytime, however, there's discussion going on about one particular question, you don't need to raise your hand or wait or to be called on. Just participate in the conversation like it's a regular conversation. The only time that we ask you to raise your hand in the webinar room is if you want to be called on to ask a new question, to start a new topic of conversation. So with that, we won't wait any longer. I'm going to present the first question that we have, and we'll just get our moderators to get us started talking on this question, and then we can all share our ideas and suggestions. So the first question is, what are your suggestions for having a conversation with a trainee that's refusing advice or overly arrogant in his or her abilities?
I'll start.
Wow, that's a great question. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to take turns. We'll see how this works, but I'll begin by addressing the way we approach instruction is we have conversations before we begin. We talk about what is going to be necessary to be successful. And we really explain what we expect from the individual, including behavior, all the factors that are involved in traveling, and we make that expectation very clear. If indeed we feel the individual maybe have some of these issues that this first question addresses, we would probably put down a contract, a behavioral contract, basically list the rules of what we expect this person, this student, to follow. To really let them know that traveling independently on public transportation is going to require, specific guidelines to be safe. And we stress that throughout. And if indeed that is an issue during training, we'll revisit this contract or these rules and kind of go back and say, are we following what we all agreed we said we were going to initially? That's one of the ways we kind of address students that are not really, on the same page as us. Mike?
Yeah, I think we would tackle that in a similar fashion, Steve. I think one of the things that we try to do is we acknowledge that this is a risk with any travel training program. When we're talking about newfound skills and newfound independence, if you're good at what you're doing, a byproduct of that effort can be a false sense of security, right? So you've instructed an individual on all of the things you need to do to complete one route, start to finish. And that person might believe in earnest that, well, now that I've got this route under my belt, maybe I should tackle the other 93 routes that are around the city. So part of that is handled up front with the travel trainers and letting them know that a byproduct of your efforts can be this false sense of security and planning for that. If through our initial interview and through the training, we're not able to iron that out, we may get to a point where we have to tell the individual that, look, you have to follow our instructions. That's part of the requirement of being in the program. And if you're not able to follow those instructions and follow our recommendations and guidance, then we may have to pull the plug on the travel training experience, at least for now.
One of the things we have to our advantage here in New York City is the consequence of a school bus. If indeed someone doesn't follow the rules and really, they're making the choice, then it's okay. Then there's another student waiting to be travel trained. Why don't you go back on a school bus? And when you're ready, we can have a conversation to see how we can move forward to get you, back in the program and to be a successful independent traveler. So that's kind of a luxury we have with the Department of Ed. I know that's not the case for you, right, Mike?
Yeah, that's not the case for us because we're a nonprofit and we're not connected with the school programs in that way. However, one of the consequences for I think the question was refusing advice or being overly arrogant. One of the things that we found is that can be a phenomenal teachable moment is to allow a mistake to happen. And what I mean by that is if your travel trainee is adamant that we need to get off at stop XYZ and that's not the right stop, we can allow that to happen, get off the bus and walk a few blocks in either direction so that we're shining a light on the fact that I know you think you have this down cold, but actually you don't, and look what's happened. Look what's happened when we let you, be the captain of the ship today. So it really is just about finding those teachable moments, and in the absence of a teachable moment, you can create one.
Sometimes also, as you're speaking, Mike, I'm thinking about students who are anxious, who are nervous, who are having a difficult time expressing what it is that's, this overconfidence, so sometimes it's kind of stepping back a little bit and kind of reevaluating where you are, assessing, where are we in instruction? Is there something I'm missing? Maybe we need to have a conversation with the family or whomever, guardians, and talk about the bigger picture. What is it why is this happening? I mean, we went into this, going to do travel training with the right attitude, and maybe things have changed along the way. So sometimes we like to kind of step back and kind of look at it a little differently. Bring, in our case, a guidance counselor in, another school staff member, social worker, anybody that can, give us maybe some insight into what happened from, we started out so well and then things are now changed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So one of the things that we would do before we would end the travel training experience is we would look to that person's natural support network and see if has something changed. And if there's nothing that's changed, we might just enlist their help and say, hey, over dinner tonight, can you help us reiterate these 3 things that are really going to be important to this success of this person's independent mobility? So we would enlist their help. But I do want to say one of the things that happens, at least for us here in Portland, is that we have somebody who is intentionally sabotaging training, but not overtly so. Just subtle things, small things. And then we probe a little further and we find out that the problem is not with the individual and it's not with the transit experience, it's with the destination. So unbeknownst to the travel trainer, we've set this young adult up to go to a place that they absolutely hate. They don't want to be there. They don't want to go. So when we come across that, then we absolutely have to go back to the source of that travel training referral and have a different kind of conversation.
And I just remind everybody, this is Chrissy, that you can join in and provide some comments and follow-up questions if you'd like to do that. You just need to take yourself off of mute and join in.
Okay, so I'll throw the next question to Steve. How would you handle a conversation if a trainee decides to leave the program before you believe he or she is ready to do so?
Oh, that's a good question there, Anthony. If an individual feels that they have, the ability to travel and we're still in the midst of program, at any point, I mean, again, we'll go back and review the procedures and what the expectations are. And, there are times when we've worked with high school age students and they kind of believe they've got it sooner than we may feel they're ready. That's when we really would be kind of focusing more on things that they're really not familiar, maybe alternate routes, different modes, to try to, bring in things that are new to them. If indeed somebody is adamant about leaving, that again is a conversation we go back and have with the family member and to talk about, why, and we maybe refer back to the contract that we signed about the rules. And really talk about the process as a beginning, middle, and an end. And we haven't met, all those pieces haven't yet been taught. And if indeed the student is still adamant about, wanting to leave the program, it's their choice. We definitely would never, tell somebody they have to, or we talk about the benefits, but, if they would prefer to go back on a school bus, that's totally the individual's choice. Sometimes we've had students that when they got into the program, they're like, oh boy, I didn't know this was what I had to do. And they prefer to go back on the bus. And then maybe in a year or so, they'll come back and say, can I try again? I think I'm ready. Or on the other side of the coin, if they feel they're ready and we don't, we would never allow somebody. We would recommend that that person, goes back on a school bus and doesn't travel until they've met all the basic or requirements necessary to be successful in the program. Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking. So one, I've got kind of an anecdote that's related to this. I had an individual that I was working with that got about halfway through the return trip and then decided that he needed to go back downtown Portland, alleging that he was going to meet a friend to pick up some Mariners tickets. And looking at my watch and thinking about the day, I said, there's no way that I'm going to travel train this guy all the way back into downtown Portland. There's just not enough hours left in my day to accomplish that. So this is what I refer to as my standing at the altar story, because after about 5 minutes of conversation, and I tried to impress upon this young adult that what we needed to do is go back to school so that he can go back to his residential setting and everything would be fine. And he looked at me and I knew he kind of liked me a little bit. Maybe he even looked up to me a little bit and he said, gosh, Mike, I really like you, but we're talking about Mariners tickets, man. So he got on the bus and he left me standing at a transit center. So what I had to do was quickly think on my feet and say, well, what am I supposed to do now? So I called everybody who knew this young adult and said, all right, so here's what we're looking at. He's failed to follow my instructions today. So we're going to have to suspend him from the travel training program. But here's where he's at. Here's the bus line that he's on. This is the time that he boarded. He's headed into downtown Portland. Sounds cold, I know, but we had to just acknowledge that this is a fellow who is 21 years old. No one has guardianship over him. And if he decides that he's getting back on the bus to go do whatever it is that he wanted to do, my role at that moment in time was just to allow that to happen and then report it. So I would be curious to know how other folks who are on the call have dealt with similar kinds of situations. And if anybody wanted to chime in, I'll make sure my pencil's sharp. I'd love to write this one down.
I can add to something, Mike. You just reminded me of, if we have a student that with the trainer, the staff leaves the home with, and then that student starts to, have comments or whatever it is, the trainer gets a sense that this is not a good time to be out, we'll bring the student back home, or vice versa for leaving school. And the students saying they want to do something on their own, we'll say, well, let's go back into the school and talk to somebody there. So we always kind of try to if we don't have to address the issue too much in the specific location, to bring it back to a starting point where we were.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that made me think of something else. When we think about travel training, there's precious little travel training that happens inside the bus, right? It's mostly while you're standing there waiting on the stop, waiting at your transfer point, waiting at a transit center. So on the bus or standing there around other people is probably not the best place in the world to have those kinds of conversations. So we would do something similar, and if necessary, again, enlist the help of natural supporters and see what we can do. I'll also add that we have a saying around our office that travel trainers don't say no, but we might say not right now.
Yes.
And what we would do is we say, so travel training, we think is just not a good fit for you at this moment in time. But if you'll work on these two things, and we would have identified those through the process of travel training, the areas of weaknesses or where improvement needed to be made. We would say, if you can work on these two things, do that, call us back, we'll reevaluate, and then we'll get back out on the bus. How's that?
All right, does anybody have any comments on this question before we move on? All right, well, I'm going to call on our first person that's raised her hand. Lisa, I see that you have your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question? Lisa Womack? I'm going to unmute you, so you're going to be able to talk here in a second.
I only we did that initially when I couldn't hear you call.
Oh, I see. Okay, so no question. Very good. Well, we'll put your hand down then. Well, in that case, I'm going to go to Anthony because he has a question in the chat box.
Sure. Hi, and thanks for sending this question in, Holly. So, Mike, what do you suggest to tell a transit agency that says they do not have funding for a travel training program, so they don't even try to
I
implement
say,
travel?
show me your budget. Show me your budget, and get over yourselves. So, I mean, this is the real thing, and I wish that more transit properties around the country would kind of get on the bandwagon and support travel training. The benefactor of travel training efforts, you know, if we strip away the benefits, the personal benefits from independent mobility and having the ability to come and go as you choose, if we strip that away, transit is the benefactor. Transit wins big, right? Anytime that we're successful at teaching a person to use fixed route transportation in lieu of paratransit, that's an enormous savings right out of the gate. So part of what you might think about is how do you make the business case for travel training to the transit district?
Thank you. And Steve, do you have any thoughts on that question from Holly?
Actually, I don't. Anthony, that's a transit question, and I'm public schools, so sorry.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, we have a question in the Q&A box that we'll present to the moderators. And so that question is about recruiting trainees. Now, I assume since we're having the discussion on conversations in travel training, that it's how do you communicate your program to trainees to recruit them into the program?
I mean, I could start with that. That's for the public school systems, it's a bit of a challenge because many people do not know what travel training is or what we do or how we do it. So we have to reach out. There's lists that we try to contact staff that are already DOE employees and to see if they'd be interested in learning about what travel training is and possibly coming to join us. But it's a challenge. It definitely is difficult.
Yeah, I think one of the things for us is that because we're not connected to the school district, you know, we had to do it a different way. So what we learned early on, way back 2004, 2005, was that the best bang for our buck was to get at people at other places where they receive services. So we're talking about the county developmental disability programs and agencies in our region, mental health providers, various and sundry support groups and the like. We have an outreach specialist dedicated just to travel training and helping us tell the story. And we used to tease her all the time because we said anything that looks or smells like a staff meeting, she will find a way to get herself on your agenda, guaranteed. So that's part of it. And then the sort of phase two of that effort is finding champions. So if you have somebody in the organization that you're courting, let's say, who's a true believer in all things travel training and independent mobility, enlist the help of that person to help you tell your story. And then after you've got some success stories of your own in your travel training program, then enlist the help of past participants to tell the story and talk about what it means to be an independent traveler and how cool it is that I don't rely on anybody. I can go to work, home, recreation, to the movies, to the mall, wherever it is that I want to go.
Fantastic. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that? Maybe if we leave a really long silence, somebody will say something. All right, just kidding. We can go on to the next question. The next question that we have is, how do you address the fears of an older adult or a family member or caregiver regarding the trainee entering a travel training program or traveling independently in general?
I could start that one, Mike, if that's all right with you.
You bet. Go ahead.
Okay, that is one of the big issues with the travel training program when it's teaching young adults. We have students that have been on school buses their entire life, and the family members have gotten very comfortable with that. It's a security blanket that, okay, they put their child on a school bus in the morning, they come home on a school bus, and they feel very comfortable about that. It gets to the point when the school is encouraging that this individual maybe needs more, that they should be considered to enter the travel training program. That's when the parents, we speak to the parents of students that are referred, and we really listen. We listen to their fears, their concerns regarding their child traveling. When I speak to parents, and this is over many years, I've never said to a parent in all these years that I understand how difficult it must be. And the reason I say that is because I don't have a child with a disability, and I would never mislead or claim that I understand what it's like to let your son or daughter that's maybe never crossed the street, never done anything outdoors independently. I would never claim that I get it, and I could listen, I respect the parents, but I'll also go on to talk about the risk of the dignity of risk, and that how all of us, if given the opportunity, their child may show what they're capable of, and not to hold back. And I go over the program as far as the essential skills that we teach, all the process of what it is. But it comes down to the family believing, and that may take months. I might have a conversation with a parent, in September, and then they say, well, I'll think about it. Then maybe in December, I'll reach back out, and they're still on the fence and back and forth. So it may be a course of time before that family member allows us to at least, try travel training for a few days. But it's really the support. I feel like often we're working with the parents equally as we work with the students. But it's respect for where they're coming from, and to really kind of support them throughout the process. We keep very close contact as the program goes on. They know what's happening daily. They know when we're getting close to the end. They know the process. And once they're successful, we encourage parents to go out and see how well your child is doing. We've videotaped students and send that home with the parent, with the student, so the parent could see some of the things, how well they're doing. It's a process. I mean, and I really believe we have to respect where caretakers are coming from, and not to force it upon them and guilt them into doing this. And they must, because it's the best thing for their young adult. Mike, do you want to add to that?
This is Christy. If you don't mind, I might add a little. For those of you who don't know me personally, I do have a daughter with a disability, and so if you looked at the way I approached having her enter travel training, she's 7 years old now, so she's a little on the young side for travel training, but we would certainly consider it within the next few years. But if you look at the way I approach it versus the way my husband approaches it, we're completely different. And I think it obviously comes down to my background being in transportation. But at the same time, even though we're approaching it slightly differently, we both have very, just ingrained, you can't shake it, fears of what might happen, and that's what you're always thinking for your children, but and maybe even more so with your children that have disabilities, that you want to make sure that whatever they're doing is safe, and whatever they're doing doesn't put them in any additional danger, especially if it's something that is not strictly necessary, for example. So it's something that I am excited for her to go into travel training when it's time for her to do that. But it's something we're going to have to sit down with my husband and explain to him the benefits, and how it is a safe thing for her to learn to do, and it's ultimately a very good thing for her to be an independent traveler, and that will be skills that she can use throughout her entire life. And so I think that those are the things that he's going to want to hear when it comes time for us to make that decision. And so I think that those are really good things if you're able to share that information with caregivers or family members, that these are the, this is the information you have on the safety of riding on transit, on how it is such an added benefit to the lives of people with disabilities, and how it keeps people independent and mobile, and how they're able to get to everything that they need to get to. Those are the things that are sort of going to go through his mind, especially. I mean, I already know these things. This is my background, but for him, he just has to be reminded that those are the things that we're focusing on. That is our goal, is to make her an independent woman when she gets to that point. And we sometimes have to be reminded of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. One of the things that that we do, or one of the things that we teach our new travel trainers is, when it comes to this topic, and people are expressing that they have reservations or they're fearful of transit or what might happen to them, the number one rule is never try to minimize those fears. Never do that. So what we do is say, all right, we acknowledge those fears. We know they're real for you. Let's see what's driving that, and let's see if we can take those fears and whatever it is making you nervous one by one, and see if we can make a difference and move the needle a little bit. So if a person is telling us maybe, well, I saw on the news that if you ride the bus, you're probably just going to get mugged. And they say, well, not so fast. Let's talk about what the real numbers are. Actually, we're talking about one incident per 87,000 boardings on this particular bus line. And an incident is having your cell phone swiped, right? So it doesn't have to be a person-on-person violent crime. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, as much as I love our local news media, they don't do us many favors when it comes to travel training. A few years back, we had a very high-profile hate crime that unfolded on our light rail system. And it was terrible. It made the national news. So, finding ways to explain that our transit property really is still safe, and that to the extent that's possible, just understand that kind of activity is not the norm. I mean, it's tough. It's tough. But my number one recommendation is acknowledge those fears, don't minimize them, and try to work through them one by one, and use real information. We're talking about public transportation. You can only polish that up so much. People are perceptive and people understand what we're talking about, but just try to iron those things out one by one.
So along the same lines, and I know that, when we were talking about the development of this particular session, we also talked about how difficult it is to have somebody be ready to leave a travel training program when their family thinks they're not ready to leave. So this is a very similar kind of conversation, but I didn't know if you guys had anything extra that you wanted to add specific to trying to explain to a caregiver or family member that somebody is ready, that they're there, that they're independent, and yay for them, but how do you explain that to them when they don't quite agree?
Mike, if I may, one of the things we do is throughout training, we feel it necessary to have contact with the family, so they're on board as to the process. It's not, okay, we're starting travel training, they hear from us, and then a couple of weeks later, guess what, we're done. It's throughout daily, we send notes home and keep the family abreast as to what we did, what we're working on, and what issues specifically their child needs to, we're really focusing on. So they're part of the instruction throughout the training. So they kind of know it's beginning to get towards the end. And it's back to those conversations with the family. You realize next week your child is going to be done. This is what we worked on, the street crossings. We focused on the essential skills, the initiating, the problem solving, decision making, all the skills that got to the point where they're going to be observed or followed at the end. And based on those followings, that's going to tell us really where your child is at. And assuming the child does well, this is where we're at. If indeed a family member is really adamant and concerned, we would consider, if there was specific reasons, continuing training, doing additional followings, just to kind of alleviate some of the issues that they're going through. But again, it's a process that if they're going along the training with us as their child is, we all should be kind of seeing that the end is near or coming soon. And this is a good thing. We keep supporting that family in the benefits that your child will now be able to have. I've had parents, well, let me give you an example. students have come to me to be in travel training, and they're 18, 19-year-old young adults, and they have siblings that are maybe 13, 14 that travel independently. Which, you know, and you could just see how important this is to that person. And we try to, you know, in conversations with the caregivers, parents, remind them that this is really a life skill. This is not something we learn and say, okay, great, I can travel train, let's go back on a bus. It's going to change their life. The benefits, you know, are really going to outweigh everything else. And it's supporting. It's back to respecting where they're coming from. And if indeed there's something they feel hasn't been done or they would like to see done, we see what we can do to accommodate. Our goal is for the individual to be successful. And that's what we're working as a team. It's not travel training doing travel training. It's everybody's involved to see that person be successful at the end.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a village, right? Yeah, I'm kind of struck by, you know, for people who aren't familiar, you know, Steve is New York City. I'm all the way on the other coast, so in some ways we're kind of a bi-coastal teleconference today. But as this conversation evolves a little bit, I'm kind of struck by how alike we are. There's more commonalities than there are differences between the two programs, and they couldn't be set up differently if you planned it. But to Steve's point, independent mobility to get you out there and make you successful, that's the ultimate goal of every travel training program that I've ever heard of from coast to coast. I mean, that's just what we're after. Now we tell families, safety is always paramount, always, always. Safety first, safety always. So part of our initial interview is to tell parents and other caregivers, look, if we think for a second that this is going to be unsafe and that your loved one is not ready for this experience and this opportunity, then we're going to pull the plug on it and we're going to let you know. We're not going to continue the process just so that we get to the end and you know, it was a failure, you know, to begin with. So that's I guess that's essentially how we would look at that. The other thing is we're all beholden to our funders. So if you're not going to allow your son or daughter or family member to be an independent traveler after the travel training experience, then we want to know that sooner than later so that we can say, no soup for you. We're not going to spend the resources if you're not going to allow this to happen if we're successful at the end.
Yeah, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more because it's far and few, but over the years that has happened to us where we have trained a student, they were successful, their peers were thrilled, school staff were thrilled, and then all of a sudden the parents' fears came back and they said, no, I can't, I want my child back on the bus. It's devastating for the individual. So as best we can, you're making a good point, Mike. You want to get a sense from that caregiver that yes, this is necessary. I am going to allow it to happen, and I'm not going to hold my child back. And safety, as you said, Mike, also really it comes down to that. You know, if we're all not on the page of safety first, you know, then we shouldn't be in this profession.
Exactly.
If somebody
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
If someone, for whatever reason, doesn't have the skills right now, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not ever. It means we need to put it on hold for a little while. Let's revisit it. Let's talk about what it is that needs to be addressed, but we can come back to it. Nobody should ever be completed. If a travel trainer has reservations, you can't do this job and say, I think that student's going to be okay. You can't. You have to feel confident because that's what you're telling the parent. We're the professionals. We're the ones that they're looking to for guidance in this such a difficult time, these parents and families. So
yeah,
safety first. If not, you know, put it on hold.
Yeah, they say, well, how are you going to make sure he or she doesn't get lost? And I say, well, here's what we're going to do. First of all, until I am 150% sure that person can be in the community independently and has some problem-solving skills. If something were to happen, they can fix that, get themselves back on track. If I'm not 150% confident that that's going to happen, that person is not going to be out of my line of sight, period.
So this is Christy again, and I'll just add that the reason this came to mind as you were talking earlier, and as we were talking about it when we were planning this session, is that I recently had an experience with my daughter where her occupational therapist was so excited, and she came to me and said, "I think that your daughter is ready to graduate therapy." And instead of being excited and instead of being happy about it, I got very nervous and very scared. And my initial response was, instead of saying, "Oh, this is fantastic, you know, what do we need to do to wrap this up?" I said, "Well, there's these 15 other things that you need to work on her with." You know, I was just throwing the kitchen sink at the therapist, poor lady. I mean, I feel bad for her now, and I've recovered since. But my initial thought wasn't, even though it should have been, that I was super happy about her being at this great place where she's going to be independent now, or at least more independent than she was, in the ways that her therapist has been working with her. But my response instead was, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to lose this resource." And so it's been really good to hear you guys talk about how, you know, yes, it's understandable for parents to be nervous, but as parents, we also need to think about the resources that your programs are putting into this as well, and be respectful of what time and energy and effort and funding you're spending on that. And you really shouldn't be going into programs without the express purpose of independence being at the end. So it's good as a parent for me to hear that as well. And just FYI, it took me a couple days. I finally settled down. I finally have come to, you know, understanding that this is a really great thing. And so we're really excited now, but my initial response was just an incredible fear, you know, and so that's what sort of brought that to mind for me. So any other comments on this question before we move on?
If I could just add, Christy,
Yeah.
When we complete a student, we make it clear to the family that there's no guarantees. You know, just because they went through the travel training program and we did all these things, and this is what your child did, and they were followed or observed, and this is what we saw. We never mislead a family that, okay, their child is going to be fine now. You know, we're right from the day one honest that none of us are fine. When any one of us leave this teleconference today, who knows what's going to happen to us? So when we speak to parents, we go out of our way to make it clear that this just because somebody went through travel training doesn't mean they're going to be safe. What that means is they were taught the skills that are necessary to travel safely and independently. They've demonstrated that to us during followings. That's what we say. The decision it ultimately has to be a family or a caregiver's decision. You know, nothing is guaranteed. So we want to make sure that it's not misleading to a family when they're making the final decision, and we leave it at that. The decision for your child to travel is up to you, not up to us. Personally, the program, New York City Department of Ed, it's up to the parent to allow that.
That's an excellent point. You know, and I think probably most travel training programs, you know, have some kind of a consent waiver or permission to be in the travel training program, something along those lines. And we've got something that's very specific in our consent waiver, and it's our consent form that's also kind of a liability waiver. But it speaks to the fact that to be in the program, you need to acknowledge and accept that there are inherent risks with being out in the community. And what that means is if you step off the curb and break your leg, that's terrible, but it wasn't our fault. So you just, you know, having those conversations with people and let them know that, you know, when we get to the end of this, we're going to give you what our professional opinion is. But the decision to act on that and to allow your family member or the person that you're responsible for to travel independently, that is a very personal decision that is going to take a little bit of deliberation.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. It's our professional opinion based on what was taught and what we saw and a recommendation, but it really has to come from that family. Yes. Couldn't agree with you all, my friend.
Okay, so Mike, this next question is for you, and this turns the focus from the trainee back to in-house and your peers. If you see someone whose travel training approach or instruction you don't really agree with? Have you had that happen, I should say? And if so, how did you deal with it? How did you tell the person, I don't think what you did was correct, or this is how I would have done it?
Ooh,
Oh.
that's an interesting question.
All right, let me see if I understand this. So it's how do I tell a travel trainer that I don't think their approach to the travel instruction was appropriate?
Yes. One of your peers that you, or maybe someone
Okay.
that, yeah.
So I'm not allowed to just say, "Hey, don't do that again."
And maybe that's how you handled it.
Oh gosh. Let me think. Because this is kind of an individualized thing. As a program manager, it's let me just say, in the world of travel training, nothing can be a one-size-fits-most approach. Everything has to be really tailored to the specific needs of the person that you're working with. And so that I would say the specific way that I would communicate that to one of our travel trainers would also be a very individualized approach based on the relationship that I have with that person. I have folks on staff who I could say, "Hey, don't do that again," and that would be fine. Other folks would like a little bit more of an explanation. So depending on the person that I'm talking to, I would talk to them about, first of all, the fact that there are very few things in travel training that are just wrong to do right out of the gate. But there are often better ways of doing things. So I might just suggest that, all right, so I noticed that this is what you did and you had an outcome that was okay, but it wasn't great. We've had other experiences with folks who are similarly situated, and we tried this other strategy, and 90% of the time we were able to achieve a better outcome. So something to think about. There's some food for thought for you, travel trainer.
I think I can add also, Mike, I could kind of continue what you're talking about. When we're working with staff, and often we have a lot of new staff here in New York City. We've been hiring a lot of new people. They just don't know. And when people hear the rationale as to why something is done a certain way, it's, oh, okay, that makes sense. So that's something we fall back to. It's protocol, procedure, and really explain why things are happening and the reasons that we've learned to do it this way. Kind of like we go back and say, well, way back, we used to do it like that, but because of this is why we do things now. I think travel trainers recognize, the seriousness of what they do. And I think they're often looking for the right way to do it. And it's really just supporting them, in a positive way. If we see something or if something is not the best way it could be done.
Thank you for that.
Very good.
The nice thing is when 14, almost 15 years ago, when our program was developed, you'd go online and you'd search for travel training, and the results that you would get would be all of these classes and things that you could take to be a travel agent, right? So now 15 years later, you can go do a Google search for travel training, and you'll get all kinds of hits that are specific to travel training, travel instruction, the ATI website, all of that stuff. And I say that just because I think it's important, especially in the context of a conference call where we're all talking about these issues, to remember that there's a whole network of travel trainers all over the country. And if you're stuck or you've got something that's kind of a challenge, reach out. Guaranteed somebody's already had that experience and came up with a viable solution that they would be willing to share with you just because they know what it's like to be out in the field and get stuck.
Very good. All right, so we're going to fit maybe one or two more questions in. We started just a few minutes late, so if it works for everybody, we may just go a few minutes over just to get that extra time in. But the next question is regarding programs that one of their goals is to assist people to transfer from paratransit to fixed route. And the question is, if that is one of your program goals, how do you have the conversation with people that are paratransit eligible to explain to them that fixed route is in fact a better option?
That's the $1 million question. So here's the thing, and this is the reality of it. Fixed route and paratransit, although paratransit is to be comparable to the fixed route, side of transit operations. They're competing philosophies. One sets you up for a life of reliance, while the other is, it gives you the ability to do what you want and on your own schedule without having to call and make your reservation. So, this is what I'll say. Our goal is not to convince people that paratransit is an inferior service. Our goal is to talk about all of the benefits and pros and cons with fixed route, all of the benefits, pros and cons with paratransit, and then allow people to self-select the option that makes the most sense for them. Now, this is based on the premise that most people are reasonable, and if you'll paint them a clear enough picture, people will migrate toward fixed route because it sounds cool.
Anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, I hope nobody from my transit property is listening.
No, that makes total sense to me, what you just said. But I don't know if they are. Any comments on that? All right, well, I'll let Anthony, we've got one more question at least, and so we're right at the top of the hour. I think we'll address this last question, and then unless something else comes in, we'll call it a day. But Anthony, if you could do the last question.
Sure, and I'll give this to Steve first. At what point do you think a discussion of a person's hygiene is necessary? At that point, how do you handle that conversation?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Hygiene. Well, when we're going over the rules, we talk about things that being part of it. This is when we are out in the world traveling and when we're employed, there are certain expectations such as, we have to make sure our clothes are clean. We have conversations with the students. We talk about it in more of an informal, this is what is going to be expected of you. Not specific, not a specific hygiene issue. We'll talk about it more in a general global discussion. And then maybe we'll kind of hone in to what it is that concerns us about this particular student's hygiene. If indeed it's an issue, we would hopefully have had guidance or somebody supporting us prior to coming into program. But, again, when somebody is new to travel training, it's like, well, they didn't realize they needed to take care of that. But, that's one of the things a hurdle, I should say, that we often get through pretty easily. Again, because students are so motivated. If that just means I need to do these few things to get off that cheese bus, that school bus, then they're willing to address those hygiene issues. So it's not, at least for us, it isn't, I think, as big an issue as it may be for other programs. Mike, I'm sure you have stories.
Yeah, we've got some stories. As I'm sitting here thinking about how I would respond to this, one of the things, and I say this, in a variety of ways, but I say stinky people need a ride, grumpy people need a ride too, mean people still need transportation. But as I'm thinking about this and thinking about all the people that I have some firsthand knowledge of as they come through the travel training program, I don't think we've had any travel training participant that smelled worse than just the next person on the city bus. So I don't think it's come to a point where we thought a conversation was necessary, but I can tell you we've had some situations where it was a close call. We worked with one individual who, I think she must have had 9 cats who lived on the inside of her studio apartment with another 13 cats that lived on the couch that was parked out on the front stoop. So this poor individual would come on the bus with us, and the body odor was so bad that we couldn't sit with or near the individual. We would sit a couple of seats back because she just reeked of kitty litter and ammonia because of so many cats. That said, I think in that case we did call a case manager and kind of run it all by, and case manager was of the opinion that, yep, these are all known issues. We've been working for years to get her to address this, and this. But the reality is she's an adult and she's allowed to make decisions on her own, even if they're bad ones. So that was sort of a bitter pill to swallow, but that's the reality of what we're looking at daily.
Well, Mike and Steve, thank you so much for such a great discussion today. We're going to bring the session to a close now with the top of the hour. So we remind you to please fill out your evaluation for the teleconference. Let us know how you like the topic. Was the information really pertinent and did it resonate with you? So you'll get that link shortly in your email. And also we just have a few important comments to close on. Thank you so much for sitting in on the teleconference. To all the attendees, your participation and membership dues make all of ATI's activities possible. A reminder, our annual meeting is set for August 7th through 9th in Atlanta. For more information on early bird registration prices, please visit our website, travelinstruction.org. And stay tuned for more exciting webinars and teleconferences in 2019. You'll see a couple of the topics listed on the page now, but they include training people with individual or hidden disabilities and recruiting for small group sessions. So again, those dates are being determined right now, and we'll start to advertise those as soon as they're set. And then lastly, a big thank you again to Mike, Steve, and Christy for putting together today's presentation. You'll see our contact information on the screen there, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.